Introduction. As we get started in our topic of the certified ethical hacker, one of the first things we'll do is just kind of introduce some round topics here, such as why you would even want to be a CEH, why you want to be a certified ethical hacker, and what will it get you, besides getting in trouble if you're not careful with how you use the certification and how you use your skills. We'll be talking about those kinds of things, as well as certain prerequisites for the CEH course. These are not carved in stone, but there's certain things that will help you if you already have a foundational level of knowledge in certain topics. We'll also talk about some expectations. I mean, it's easy to think that in a kind of a fantasy world that it would be just as easy as it is on TV when somebody hacks into something. I mean, if you ever watch CSI or any of these detective shows on right now, there's always some computer expert that can just hack into the CIA's computers or the FBI or any other hard target, and they can do it within seconds. Well, that just doesn't happen. Not that it's never happened, but it just doesn't happen like it does on TV, where anybody with a lot of computer knowledge can just instantly get in. So we'll talk about some of those kinds of expectations as well as some others. I'm sure you've probably heard of an oxymoron, haven't you? That's two or more words, when put together, contradict one another, such as that old saying people say, same difference. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Or plastic glasses, or a peace force, or a headbutt, or Microsoft Works, or an adult male. Is there any such thing? So anyway, there's a lot of oxymorons out there, and probably the most baffling of them all is a certified ethical hacker. What in the world is an ethical hacker? Doesn't seem like they are words that should go together. So what is a certified ethical hacker then? Well, in summary, a certified ethical hacker is someone who's going to use the same hacking techniques to test the security of an organization that an actual hacker would use to be able to compromise that organization. Really, the difference comes down to motive and what actions they actually perform with any data they are able to determine. And the ethical part of that is, hopefully, we have some integrity and honesty, and we will tell the company that we're trying to penetrate there exactly what we've found, how we found it, and we will not divulge any of the confidential information that we might have seen along the way. A certified ethical hacker is also going to be a little bit different than a system builder. Now, a lot of you probably come from a background where you're a network administrator or a help desk person or somebody like that. You're a computer consultant, or maybe you do Active Directory design, or you configure web servers or services or something like that. Well, you're used to starting from something with a ground-up kind of a mentality. How am I going to build this server and install the necessary services in order for them to have an efficiently running website, or to have Active Directory interoperate in such a way and where they'll get good replication between their sites and all these other kinds of things. We try to have a tendency to build things up and make them work. Whereas a hacker, on the other hand, has a tendency to take a look at something that's already in place and determine how they can modify it or possibly maliciously tear it down. And the word hacker really is not by itself a bad thing. One definition of a hacker is someone who just enjoys learning the details of computer systems and how to stretch out their own capabilities, as opposed to just generic users who only want to learn the minimal amount necessary. Well, really, that sounds more like to me like a power user. Another definition is one who programs enthusiastically or enjoys programming rather than just theorizing about programming. And that goes a little bit beyond our scope, because you don't have to be a programmer in order to be a certified ethical hacker. But in any case, neither one of those definitions I just gave you have any kind of real negative connotation to it. Similar to my brother-in-law. When he was growing up, he used to go around the house, look for radios and electronics, and he would just get a screwdriver out and dismantle them to see how they worked. Well, he was being a hacker. He wanted to see how something would work, or he would try to modify something to see if he could get it to work in a different way. Just like the hack that exists nowadays, where you can take a laser pointer and turn it into a radio. Well, that's a hack. It's not necessarily a computer hack, but it is a hack where you're modifying the intended purpose of something to make it do something else. So that's different than someone who has a constructive mentality. Instead, they're deconstructive, not in the sense of they're wanting to destroy something, but they are at least wanting to modify something. And in our current context, in terms of security, well, we do generally think of hackers as malicious parties seeking to gain information, seeking to deface your websites, or seeking to just wreak havoc in some way or another, or compromise privacy. So to some degree, we want to do the same things, just that our motive is different. And we also want to analyze, of course, any potential weaknesses that we can find in an organization. And this is going to really come into play a little bit later on when I talk about this, but it's going to come into play when we talk about the scope of a hack. A certified ethical hacker, of course, is going to have permission to try to penetrate a network or to penetrate an IT infrastructure as if he were a malicious hacker. But of course, he's not going to be malicious. But one thing that's important in that is that you only penetrate what you have permission to penetrate. And we'll discuss that a little bit later on. Also, a certified ethical hacker hopefully has a trustworthy credential, because we want to emphasize that we hopefully are ethical persons, and we're not going to divulge confidential information that we find. Or if we're able to compromise a server with maybe root authority, which is the highest level of authority, or administrator authority if you're in a Windows environment, that we're not going to leave a back door there so that after the certified ethical hack is over and our contract is over, that we'll somehow sneak back in at a later point in time to mine that company's information for our own personal use. So that's another reason why we might want to be a certified ethical hacker, because there are a lot of consultants out there, quote unquote, that would say, hey, I'll do a penetration test of your network. And when we do these penetration tests, or otherwise known as pen tests, well, there's nothing that really says that they can be trustworthy. And hopefully our certified ethical hacker certification will identify us as just that. Now, of course, even if you are CEH, you're going to have to also gain a little bit of experience, and so you have word of mouth that you can indeed be trusted, and so that will help to build into your resume, is gaining a little experience as you go. And you might just start with some small companies or with people that you know, and build up your resume as you go there. And you can also use certified ethical hackers to identify training needs. So, for example, one of the hacks is very commonly used is social engineering. And social engineering is one of the most effective ways of hacking into computer systems. It doesn't require any programming knowledge, or really very little technical knowledge as well. It just really requires you to be a good salesperson. That's really all it is. In fact, one of the most famous hackers of all time was one of the original hackers, at least in our current history. That was a guy named Kevin Mitnick, and he went to jail for a long time because he eventually got caught. But he actually was not as good technically as he was as a social engineer. And he would call people up and pretty much con them into giving up things like passwords. And he might call them up and say, you know, hi, this is the IT department. There's a problem with your account. We need your password so that we can unlock certain features of your account and give you further access to other parts of the network, or words to that effect. And it's amazing how many people would actually give that information up. And we'll talk a lot more about social engineering, like I said, at a little bit later time. Well, another good example of social engineering was one guy stood outside of a major corporation one time, and he had a big old container full of candy bars and a sign that said, a candy bar for your username and password. And believe it or not, people would actually give up their username and passwords for a candy bar. Well, this would help to identify various training needs that we would have. We would need to retrain our users, or to train them to not give out their username and password even to somebody from the IT department. Of course, in most situations, if there's a problem with their password, like they've forgotten it or something like that, we can always reset it for them. And so we don't really, as an IT department, need to know their existing user password. Also, we can take a look at our security return on investment. We might be able to determine, because of a certified ethical hacker's penetration test, where we're weakest in our organization. Maybe we don't really need to spend $20,000 on new routing equipment. Maybe the real problem here has to do with some of the web programming that we're using, and it's got some vulnerabilities in the scripting that we're using. Well, that's where we would need to put our investment dollars in, our security dollars, not in the routers, but in the way that we're programming our web pages. So it just helps us to be more smart with, or more smart with the kind of security investment dollars that we have. Let's also discuss some prerequisites for CEH here. Now, I'm going to teach this course with the assumption that you have a reasonable level of knowledge in all of these different topics. Let's start with Linux. You don't need to be a total Linux expert in order to be a hacker. Many hackers, if not most, are very, very good with Linux, because Linux is the platform that's used to launch a lot of attacks. There's a lot of hackers' tools that are written for the Linux platform. So kind of the root or the source of a lot of hacks comes from Linux. But really, it's just a matter of being able to operate the tools from within Linux in many cases. In fact, I'm not a total Linux expert. There's other people that are much better than I am at Linux, but nevertheless, I can still pull off a pretty good hack from within Linux because I know the basics of how to operate from within that operating system. I'm much better with Windows, and many people are better with Windows because it's more ubiquitous. A lot more people use Windows. There's a larger distributed base of Windows. And for Windows, you need to be at least at a power level, a power user level, in order to be able to be a competent, certified ethical hacker. Other things that you should have a good understanding of are networking concepts and TCP/IP. With networking, again, you don't have to be a total networking expert. You don't have to be, a Cisco certified internet networking engineer or a CCIE, which is the top level of Cisco certification. You don't need to be able to write complicated rules for different router requirements and different router IOSs. But you should have a good fundamental understanding. You should be able to tell me the difference between a hub and a switch and how each one of those will affect your penetration testing efforts. For example, if you're trying to sniff traffic off the network. You should know what a router is and how it works. You should know what a closed port is, what an open port is. And I recommend that with networking, if you go to CompTIA.org and you look at the exam objectives for their Network Plus exam objectives, which is what I've already opened here, then many of these concepts that you look through here, and I'm not going to exhaust these, many of these should be familiar to you. You should be able to understand what these different kinds of network devices are, for example. You should be able to understand different things about the TCP/IP protocol through here. You should be able to identify many, if not all, of these different items. So this will just kind of give you an idea of whether or not you have a foundational level necessary to proceed with CEH. Now, if you don't, and if a lot of those things look really strange to you and you weren't sure what any of them were, as I teach this, I'm still going to give you some kind of a review statements as we get started to kind of give you a little bit of groundwork for networking. So if you're a little weaker in that area, I'll try to help shore that up as I go. You also need to have some strength with TCP/IP. You need to understand particularly how host communication takes place within TCP/IP. It starts with a SYN, and then there's a response which is a SYN-ACK, and then there's resets that you have to understand when those kinds of things would occur. So all different kinds of things in communication with TCP/IP, and once again, I'll help to lay some foundation with that as we go. You also should understand the differences between various kinds of ports, what commonly used ports are. For example, you should know what port 80 is, what port 21 is, the difference between TCP and UDP. But again, we'll review that as we go. And finally, you should have an inquisitive nature as a hacker. And that's why hackers become hackers, because someone says there's only one way to do a certain thing. Well, in their nature, in our hacker's nature, we say, wait a minute, I'll bet there's 3 or 4 different ways to do that, and I'm going to stay up all night trying to figure out how to do it. And you know what? 9 times out of 10, it's not even productive to try to figure out how to do those things. We reach a lot of dead ends in hacking. But we're just inquisitive and determined by nature, so we keep hacking away at it. Now, by the way, if you feel weak in any of these areas, you can get more training from a number of different sources. This is not a sales pitch, but CBT Nuggets does have additional videos for these top 3 items. There's a lot of Cisco topics that we have. We also have a very good Network Plus topic that's being taught. I've taught almost all of the Windows courses, especially for current versions of Windows. A guy named Perry does a great job with Linux videos. So you can look into ours or any other good source for training with these prerequisites if you feel a little bit weak in these areas. Let's also talk about what to expect as a CEH and with this course as well, and that is that most hacks result in failure. That's why we have to be persistent as hackers, and that's why we stay up till 2 and 3 in the morning, because we keep hacking away, and we mostly fail, but once in a while, we're successful in cracking through something, and we get to get a modicum or a degree of success there, and that's highly rewarding. It's kind of like baseball. I mean, a batter fails to hit the ball most of the time, and yet if his batting average is 300 or so, that's a really good batting average. So even as a hacker, even if you fail most of the time, you can still be pretty good and still have some pretty elegant hacks out there. Also, it's not like that movie Swordfish. I don't know if you've seen that or not. With who was that? John Travolta, Hugh Jackman, and oh yeah, Halle Berry. In any case, in one scene, a guy had a gun up to Hugh Jackman and was pressuring him to hack into something. So he started typing really fast, and all of a sudden, he hacked into it. Well, having lots of pressure or having a gun to your head or typing really fast does not make you a better hacker so that you can break into any system in the world within just seconds. And it kind of goes back to this first thing that takes place with hackers, and that is that we mostly fail. Most hacks against hardened targets will fail. For example, if you've got a fully patched current iOS on your Cisco routers, and all the hosts inside are currently patched with the latest patches for Microsoft, there's good virus protection and/or spyware protection, and the targets are very, very hardened, and the users are all very well trained, then you're probably not going to have very many successful hacks against organizations like that. Typically, we go after targets that are softer, and this might not mean that you're just hacking Billy Joe Jim Bob's dry cleaner down the street. There's still a lot of very large targets out there with tens of thousands of users that do not have the up-to-date patches, or they're not watching for a certain router very carefully, or they're not programming things very well. And so there's certainly targets out there that are very large and high profile that are still vulnerable. Also, I may have to show you only screenshots of certain things because I might have to black out certain things such as the names of companies or IP addresses, and that's just to protect those companies because, after all, I am a certified ethical hacker and I don't want to advertise to the world of a vulnerability in a specific company or something like that. Now, also there's an issue of quality assurance. There's no one tool that has everything that a hacker would need within it. There's some tools that have lots of different things in them, like ceh-intro, which is an excellent tool, can do a lot of different things. However, there's not one size fits all tool. And as a result, you can't depend on one company to perform quality assurance on the tools. A lot of these tools are just kind of homebrew applications that somebody has put together. As a result, they may crash. They may burn. They may not run at all. And so you might run into some of these hackers' tools that don't perform the way other retail applications might that you would have expected to in the past. So just be prepared for that. Now, in my experience, many of the simpler applications work very well on their own because the programming is very simple and fundamental, such as hping to nmap is also a really good application because there's been a lot of people using it, a lot of people reporting any problems that they've had with it, and they do a pretty good job of keeping up on a lot of those things. Also with the CEH exam objectives, if you go to the CEH website, which is the ceh-intro.wmv website, and you print out all of the certified ethical hacker objectives, you're going to print out 40 pages worth of objectives. And in fact, here's the outline for the course for the exam objectives that EC Council has. And if I just scroll on through here, there's 40 different pages of stuff here. Now, let me also point out that of all of these hacking tools, we will use a lot of these different things, but some of them are rarely used anymore. Some of them are kind of old. Most hackers will come up with kind of a CD-ROM or a thumb drive or some kind of toolkit, if you will, that has their favorite tools on there. There's probably a couple or a few dozen tools on there. Not all of the tools that you'll see in this entire list. There's quite a few that we'll probably never even touch on. So we're not going to address every single item that appears on that objectives list because it's not practical and because not all the exam objectives are really directly relevant to what you're going to need to know. Also, in terms of what to expect, oops, that's supposed to be a straight line there. There's multiple methods to do a lot of these different hacks. It's not like a wizard in Microsoft Windows where you can only click on something and then next, finish through it. There are a lot of different ways to do this. And if you're a hacker who's already had some experience, you might be looking at something that I've done. I might use ceh-intro to crack a password, and you might say to yourself, well, geez, why didn't you just use John the Ripper? It's much faster. Well, usually it is. I don't know why. Maybe there would be a good reason for using ceh-intro. Maybe not. Sometimes it's just a matter of preference. Another reason might be a preference for an operating system. ceh-intro works from within Windows, and it's kind of a Swiss Army knife tool because it has a lot of different things that it does besides just password cracking. If I'm already in the tool, maybe I might as well keep using it to do other things in addition to password cracking. So, there's a lot of different ways of doing all of these things, and there's not a regimented list of you have to go through step A, B, and C. We're going to try to teach you mostly here principle and the types of tools that you can use. Also, I want to apologize in advance. I may go to certain websites that hackers frequent, and many of them are tied to what many people would consider offensive material. They might be tied to porn. There might be a lot of foul language on them. I'm going to try my best to obfuscate that or conceal it or avoid it altogether unless I absolutely have to go to a site to prove a point of some kind or another. But I'll do my very, very best not to offend people. But I also have to point this out. If you're going to be involved in the hacker world, you just can't be easily offended because you're going to see a lot of stuff. A lot of hackers also are very pointed in their opinions. If you get involved in the hacker community where you chit-chat back and forth in chat rooms and so forth, you're going to get flamed, even if you're an expert hacker. Hackers just have a tendency to do that. And it can be a very brutal kind of a world at times. So if you have sensitive feelings, you might just want to stay from the outside looking in rather than getting into the world of hacking and being involved in that community and looking at all the things that the hackers look at. Also, let me point out that since you might potentially be going to offensive websites on your own as you do your own research, that if you're doing this for an employer and you expect to do this at work, make sure that you get written permission from your employer first, because you wouldn't want someone to see you going to a, quote, inappropriate website for a hacker community website, which might have potentially offensive material on it, and then for you to get into an HR issue at work or to get reprimanded somehow. So make sure that you have permission in advance for that. Another thing to make sure that you do as a certified ethical hacker is that you log everything that you're doing, especially, again, if you're doing this research or if you are attempting to do penetration testing. I recommend that you get a keystroke logger. There's hardware versions of keystroke loggers as well as software versions that you can get. I like the hardware ones better because if your computer crashes or something like that, then you could potentially lose the ability of the keystroke logger to retain information. It might be in a memory buffer, and that information might be lost. Whereas hardware keystroke loggers, you just plug it into the end of your keyboard. They're available for USB or PS2. There's a small amount of memory on there, and then you can just download that memory into a more permanent medium to keep track of all your keystrokes. And this will help to verify that you're not just, I hope anyway, not just surfing deliberately for offensive material, but that you're just accidentally coming across it as you're looking at certified ethical hacker type of websites or hackers' websites. And keystroke logging is good when you're doing a pen test. Another thing you should also always do, and this is just a side note, is to always keep a log of everything that you're doing. If you do come across a successful hack, make sure that you document every step that you took to get to that point. Because when you come into a summary meeting at the end, and you tell those network administrators that you were able to hack into their SQL server and to be able to steal certain kinds of data, well, they could just say, oh, no, you didn't. You just did this and this and this. Well, you want to be able to prove to them every step that you took, and your logs, your keystroke logging, and your written record will help to verify all the steps that you took. Plus, you could be doing a pen test for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It can go on for quite a while, and over time, you're going to start to forget what steps you took to get to some of those hacks, and you don't want to be left, blindsided when someone's trying to challenge what you did. Also, finally, let me point out that if you're already a somewhat experienced hacker, you've already used certain of these tools and so forth, well then certain things that we have in this course might be different from what your experience is. A large part of that is because, again, as certified ethical hackers, we're not trying to do anything malicious or destructive apart from the permission of a certain company that we've gotten written permission from. As a result, some of our methods might be slightly different, although we generally try to use the same exact tools that a hacker of any kind would use. So I just want to prepare you for some slight differences there. Again, we try to mirror everything a real hacker would do and use the same tools. Also, if you're already an experienced hacker, please be aware of the fact that we're trying to also bring people up from a little or no level of knowledge up to an intermediate level of hacking. There are even higher levels of hacking than CEH, but CEH is an excellent foundation to get you going. So if you're expecting more advanced things, such as writing Perl script, or doing C++ programming to be able to come up with your own kinds of buffer overflows, or if you're expecting me to show you how to use programming to come up with some kind of an O-day, and by the way, O-day, or 0 days it's also called, is a new exploit that has not yet been reported to anybody. So in other words, you would be the author of some kind of an exploit. Well, all of those kinds of things are a little bit beyond the scope of this particular course, so just keep that in mind if you're already an existing hacker. Now, I mentioned keystroke loggers a little while ago. I thought I'd show you an example of one at keyghost.com here. If you do a Google search for keystroke loggers, you'll get probably hundreds of different results. This is just one of the companies that does keystroke logging. And this is a hardware keystroke logger, which is my preference. And this new product that they have will store up to 2 million keystrokes, and that's an estimated 12 months worth of keystroke logging. Let me point something out here, by the way, as well. I mentioned this earlier in the context of keeping track of what you, as the pen tester, is doing. However, you can also use this against your target. You could roam around the building during off hours or when everybody's, packing up to go home, and you can find a desk where nobody's sitting at that time, and quickly, within 10 or 15 seconds, insert this between the keyboard and the PS2 port on their computer. And there's also a USB version of this same tool. In any case, nobody will ever know that you put it there. It's pretty much invisible to people because it's a background behind the computer and everything. And you kind of get I think there it is, a screenshot of what this thing looks like there. It really doesn't look much different than what the user might already see on their keyboard. In any case, this will also be very useful in capturing things such as users' passwords and being able to determine what their passwords are, see what they chat about, see what they're emailing to people, all kinds of things. You could get some company secrets out of this, and so that might be a very useful tool for a certified ethical hacker. One hacker, in fact, that I talked to a little while back, it's about a year ago, I guess, he put one of these on a secretary of a high-level executive, put it on that secretary's computer, and she was making travel arrangements for this executive's daughter. So at the end of the pen testing, they went in and made the report, and the hacker went into the executive and said, your daughter is flying out of Chicago on flight 1729 or whatever, on such and such an airline, and she's flying to Florida on this date, she's returning on this date, and it made a pretty big impression because it was able to get all of that information out of the computer simply by using a keystroke logger. Now, of course, this does present one thing, and that is that you have to have physical access. So it depends on whether you're doing, a black box test or a white box test, and those two terms we'll discuss a little bit later on. But a white box test would be pretty much the same level of access you would have as if you were an employee. A black box test would be pretty much the same level of access you would have if you were just an internet stranger on the outside of this organization. And of course, if you're doing it from a black box test, you can't really go into the building and physically install this, but you will still be able to install a software key logger. You'll just have to do it through the internet, and you'll have to use some more covert methods to be able to do it. In this nugget, I introduced to you certain things about certified ethical hacking. Remember, first of all, a certified ethical hacker is just that. We are, hopefully, ethical, and we're going to be trustworthy sources to be able to do pen testing for certain organizations or individuals. Mostly it's going to be organizations. Remember, our whole purpose here is not to abscond with sensitive information and to be able to use it unethically. Our purpose here is to abscond with that information and show them what could have happened if a malicious hacker had the same access that we did, or had the same ideas or tools that we did. And in fact, maybe they've already lost certain kinds of data. So certified ethical hackers hopefully will help organizations to be more secure. We also talked about certain prerequisites. Remember, it's going to be very helpful if you have some good level of knowledge in Windows, if you have at least a smattering of knowledge in how to make your way around Linux, and if you have a pretty good knowledge of networking concepts and TCP/IP. We also talked about a number of different expectations. So, for example, remember, you can't just hack into the Secret Service, database within 30 seconds, or the CIA, or anything like that. And I don't recommend that you ever do those things in the first place, unless the government has hired you as signed contracts to be able to do that kind of thing. Because otherwise, I'm telling you, you can go to jail for that kind of stuff now. In the past, when someone would hack into something, the companies would just marvel and say, wow, you must be smart. Let's hire you for 6 figures a year. Now they just send you to jail, quite gleefully, I might add. So again, as a certified ethical hacker, make sure you have permission. And we'll talk a little bit more about legal issues and things in an upcoming nugget here as well. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.